Hello and welcome to Inside and Out with Patricia Stark. I am Patricia Stark, and joining me is my co-pilot, Lynn Cimetti. Hello, Lynn.
Good morning, Patricia.
So today we decided to talk about a controversial subject, something that people either do or think is terrible, or sometimes do and sometimes don't do. Swearing. We want to know, how do you feel about swearing when it comes to communication? Our call-in number today is 362-0013, and you can also email us at patricia@patriciastark.com. But do give us a call at 362-0013. We really want to know what you think about this. Now, people feel very strong about this topic. And Lynn, let me ask you, is swearing ever okay?
Well, as many people who know me know that I actually swear a lot, which is not a good thing, but I use it because it gets me my thoughts out, or not even my thoughts, because that's not true. It's my anger or my frustration, but I believe that it really matters where it is that you do it. Mm-hmm. In public, no. At home, yes. Not in front of the kids, but when I'm by myself sometimes and I drop something on my toe, or I don't, get what I wanted to get done.
Well, when I work with people for public speaking or interview skills or interpersonal skills at work, we'll talk about this. And I'll explain that sometimes the way that you speak in your normal life can carry through in those moments when it's not appropriate. So sometimes it's about conditioning. And if I work with someone who swears and I know that that's their thing, and let's say that they have to be on television or they're going to get interviewed about a hot button topic or something that's very emotional, we'll have this discussion quite a bit prior to that, because unfortunately the way that we're conditioned to react and the way that we're conditioned to express ourselves and our emotions kind of is subconscious and can just happen when we don't want it to be there. So when we do it in our personal lives, it can catch us at a bad time.
That's true. And there are a lot of people who don't know the difference, and perhaps it's just because they can't control themselves from one place to the other. So maybe the idea is that you really shouldn't curse.
Mm-hmm. And I know that there are people that this is just part of their personality, and they want to be able to express themselves, etc. I did a lot of reading and studying up on this before this show, because I really wanted to see what do people feel about this from both angles, to be fair. So again, we're talking about swearing, cussing, cursing, whatever you want to call it. Our call-in number is 362-0013. We really do want to hear, do you think that this is ever acceptable? Do you feel that there's certain times that it's acceptable? Certain places. Is it okay here but not there? Is it okay between friends and family members but not at work? Some of the studies that I looked into were talking about how, for instance, in the dynamic between a boss and an employee, if the boss curses at the employee, sometimes they have to deal with it, but that could also be construed as bullying. But if the employee curses at the boss, odds are pretty good they're getting fired. So there's some double standard going on there. And also with bullying and internet bullying and social media bullying and texting and things like that, usually within the realm of that type of bullying is a whole lot of expletives. So, of course, they're very emotional words, but words can cut like a knife. That old saying, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me, just simply isn't true.
I wonder, so is there a way to determine which curse words are more acceptable than others? Because I think there are a few, damn. Mm-hmm. Is that
and by the way, I think we all know the glossary of terms, so if you do call in today, we don't really need the example of the word. I think we all kind of know what they are. Like I say to my 9-year-old, you can say the S word or the F word. Like, there's ways to talk about these words without actually using these words, so we would appreciate that our callers kind of stick to those rules as far as that goes. But we have quite a few studies here that we're going to be talking about today that actually explain why it might be good in some situations. And I'd like to hear people's take on that. But we do have our first caller. So hi, caller. Good morning.
Good morning.
So what do you think about swearing, cursing?
I don't tolerate it at all.
Tell us why.
Yeah. It's just rude and disrespectful.
Mm-hmm.
But I have another issue. I have a male boss, and he would come in and he would say, "Hey," and I would tell him, "Don't address me like that," several times, and he still does it.
So he addresses you just by saying "hey," like he doesn't know your name?
Exactly. And that's rude.
It is rude. How long have you worked for this person?
Oh, 8 years.
8 years. So when he says "hey" to you, do you just look back at him and say "hey"?
Oh, no. I said, "Good morning. My name is so-and-so. How are you doing, Mr. So-and-so?"
And how does he respond to that?
Oh, and he just walked away.
Well, I think it's saying more about him than it is about you. I don't think that it's probably the way he is looking at you. I think he probably is just not a great communicator, and he doesn't know what else to say, and he's awkward interpersonally, and he says "hey" because he doesn't know what else to say.
He's just rude. I think he was brought up in a cage. I'm sorry.
Well, that's very possible. You know, it's so funny that you say that, because whenever I hear people act or speak a certain way, the first thought I think is, who was that person's mother?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't like it.
No, and you're right, and I wouldn't take it either. And my father would say, "Hay is for horses." So I think the way that you're handling it, and you be professional, and you keep it in an upbeat, positive manner, and you just say, "Good morning, my name is so and so," and I think that's perfectly acceptable and a good way for you to handle it.
That's it. Thank you. I just shut him down and keep it moving.
Right, but it's all in the delivery. You do it in a positive, professional way, and there ain't nothing wrong with that.
We're not bed buddies. We don't sleep on the same roof, under the same roof. Don't address me like that. I'm sorry. And even if we do, no, I still won't accept that.
Yeah, it's too casual. Work is a place where people need to be professional and learn the right way to communicate with each other.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your call.
You. All right, bye-bye.
So we know that military folks and college students kind of have a well-earned reputation for salty language. I mean, it's just something that we hear. This is something where you might expect to hear these things. But there was a study done by Richard Stevens and John Atkins and Andrew Kingston of Keele University in the UK. And they claim that swearing actually relieves pain. Okay, this is kind of interesting. They found that repeating a swear word compared with repeating a neutral word allowed participants to deal with pain. One of the examples that they used was holding their hand in ice water for 40 seconds or longer, that they actually perceived less pain on a pain scale, and their heart rate increased. And they think that it's because people have an emotional reaction to swearing, indicated by this increased heart rate, and that it brought out the fight or flight response, which actually is known to increase pain tolerance. I thought that was interesting. That they said that the study showed that in a nutshell, swearing was an analgesic pain lessening tool. And they said that it could possibly give ibuprofen a run for its money, working us into an aggressive, heightened state. So that's interesting. You know, maybe if I hit myself in the thumb with a hammer, I might have been known in the past to say a little something and then felt bad about it. I don't know.
Well, think about the sounds you hear in delivery rooms for those women who are not having their drugs.
Okay, well, I'm going to stop you there because I had a 10-pound baby and I had natural childbirth, no drugs, and I did not have one curse come out of my mouth. And you know why? Because I was thinking, you know what, I want this to be a nice thing for my baby coming into the world. That's why I didn't want the drugs, and I was not cursing. I wasn't. As much as I was probably saying other things and feeling like I was running a triathlon, I do not remember dropping any bombs. And we have another caller. Hi, welcome to Inside and Out.
Good morning, lady.
Good morning. So what do you think of swearing? Do you think it's ever right?
Well, my question was, what are we going to do about black people with their rap music?
Well, I don't think that's just a black genre of music. I know a lot of people that like rap music, but it is an interesting thing to talk about. I know that some of my colleagues who are African American have addressed this, and there is some rap music that is mainstream, and then there's some rap music that has a lot of cursing in it. And I've heard both arguments where some people feel that it's a form of self-expression, and then I've also heard some of my colleagues in the African American community say that they don't like it, that they feel that it's just degrading, and they feel that it's something that shouldn't be a part of that. So I think any music is something that is either a positive or a negative thing, and that's something that whoever's listening to it is listening for one reason or another.
Well, how does that fit in with what you were just finished saying about aspirin and that?
Yeah, well, I'm just citing this study. They've shown that, I've seen people that are usually mild-mannered, my family and friends and colleagues included, that I never hear curse, and then they get hurt or they get injured or something happens, and I hear a word come out, and I think it's a very ethereal kind of primitive response, and based on this study, it's saying it does something to alleviate pain. I don't think that they're condoning it. I think they're just saying that this is what the study uncovered. Well, thank you so much for your call. And we have another caller. Hi, welcome to Inside and Out.
Hi, Patricia. Great show. I appreciate you taking the time and taking my call.
Thank you. So what do you think of swearing?
Well, swearing has its time and place. There's no doubt about that. Just to kind of piggyback on what your last caller said, I mean, there's music of all sorts of genres that has cursing in it. And somewhat to my chagrin, I've heard on radio stations lately, for example, The Who, one of their songs, Who Are You?
Yeah.
Famously has a curse or two in it,
yeah.
And there are some radio stations that bleep that out now. They're very sensitized to the idea that whereas 10, 15 years ago that word or some of the words that are said in songs like that were once okay to carry on the air because they kind of flowed with the music, they bleep that out now, and that's a little disheartening. Mm-hmm. However, I did want to say something about, I don't know if you're familiar with the show Opie and Anthony.
Yes, I remember that show, yeah.
Years ago was on public airwaves, 102.7
That's
here
right.
in the New York area. I loved their show, and they got raunchy every now and again, and I enjoyed their show. But what I enjoyed most about it was their sneaky way of getting around saying those words and using different code words, maybe just the first letter, to signify they were going to say that word instead.
Yeah, it's
actually was brilliant.
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point, because that's much more interesting. It's kind of like the difference between an Alfred Hitchcock movie and an in-your-face slasher movie. The Alfred Hitchcock movie that just alludes to things and has suspense and creativity and a building that's not so in-your-face is actually more on the edge of your seat and intriguing to watch than something that's just all blood and gore right there, overdone.
And the best part about that is that they both have the same effect of planting in the viewer or the listener's brain what exactly was happening. So you knew if Opie and Anthony said the letter F, for example, mm-hmm. you knew what word they meant.
Right.
And you still thought that word. But it sounded a lot funnier to hear them do the verbal gymnastics that they had to do in order to get around those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Now, when I hear that, if I ever hear them on XM radio, for example, I don't find their show nearly as entertaining anymore because now they're free to say whatever they want, and it's not as funny.
They have free reign, and I'm glad you brought up that example, because same thing with Howard Stern. I used to listen over the years, and when I first started my career, I actually was on the show because I was doing a story on this guy, Jackie the Joke Man, that was there, so I got to sit in on the studio and be part of the show.
I was on the show once too.
Oh, really? Very neat.
Yeah.
And same thing, he'd get fined when he'd have certain words that would happen, and then he switched to satellite radio, and I couldn't even listen to him anymore. It was like so much cursing that I couldn't even pay attention to what else he was talking about. Like after a while, it's just it's like enough already. It's too much, and it just was such a turnoff.
Yeah, and there was one episode of South Park which actually kind of dealt with that in a way. South Park is I love the show. They dealt with the S word, mm-hmm. and it had to do with counting the number of times they could say it in a show. But it was about a show within a show where they were all freaking out about it because another TV show was going to actually say that word on television.
Right.
The idea that when you say it so much, it loses its power and it loses its influence.
Yeah, there's no effect, there's no shock value.
There's no shock anymore. It just becomes, that's not funny. You're not entertaining anymore.
Right. It's not clever, it's not classy, it's not thoughtful. It's just in your face, and there's nothing more boring than in your face.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your call. I really appreciate it.
Comedians like Jerry Seinfeld get away with it better because they find different ways of being funny or Bill Cosby. without using words of that nature.
Right, which takes more effort and talent. You are 100% correct. Thank you so much for your call. We really appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, Pat.
Again, our number is 362-0013. And we want to talk about sometimes, in the office setting, there have been some other studies that I looked at where they were talking about how the prevalence of and the effect of swearing in the workplace. And there were a couple of researchers that said that it may be beneficial, more beneficial than a human resources director would like. There was researchers named Yehuda Baruch and Stuart Jenkins, and they found that when not used when it was not a non-abusive manner, when it wasn't abusive, that swearing enabled the development of personal relationships among coworkers. It said that if an employee used foul language in his everyday life outside of work, it represented their personality, and that the absence of this personal aspect could actually serve as a constraining barrier between employees, keeping them from getting to know each other. That it also relieves stress and frustration, etc. But they did find that it was more among lower-level employees, and that those in management and executive positions were less likely to do it in the workplace. Now, I thought that this was interesting. It also showed that it improved morale among workers, and that there were definitely situations where the foul language was not appropriate, though. So, there's all these kind of studies, and I'm sure that different people do these different studies just to try to prove whatever their point may be or the flavor of the day. But, I've seen this where you'll see people at work and they start to get comfortable with each other. So then they start to let a little bit more of their personality out, and a curse word slips out here and there. And my knee-jerk reaction when that happens is I immediately go, "Oh, wait a minute, I'm not sure how I feel about that," or "I'm not sure how I feel about that person now." And I've also seen it's contagious. It's almost like when you're in church and one person coughs and it almost opens the floodgates. Now everybody starts to cough. And I've seen this happen in work settings where it's a small group or medium-sized group, and they've gotten comfortable, they've gotten casual with each other, and now one person lets out a curse bomb or a swear word. And then all of a sudden, somebody else feels it's okay. And then somebody else slips one in. And then it's a strange kind of bonding, but I think what it ends up happening is that someone sets the tone. So I think it's important to say, what kind of a tone do we want? What kind of a sense and feeling do we want in the workplace? And when is it right and when is it wrong? And there's certainly been times where I've said something, and then afterwards I really felt like, why did I do that? It wasn't necessary. It didn't make me feel any better. Was I trying to prove a point? What was the point of that? And I just think it's kind of like potato chips, where it can be contagious, and I think it's important for people to know that it sets a precedent, it sets a tone, and it can make other people jump on the bandwagon and feel like, okay, this is the norm.
I think that's true. And, the more we go on with the conversation, the more I think about how people who often tend to swear a lot, you sometimes feel as though perhaps they really can't express themselves. Mm-hmm. So those words are the filler words and make them not get their point across.
Yeah. Well, I think that it is perceived as a limited way of being able to express yourself. And also, you have to think about the confidence that people have or don't have in you. And sometimes when you're perceived as not being able to control your emotions, not being able to control your language, you could lose the confidence that other people have in you, or that they might have had in you, and they could discount you. And that's something that is risky. And I think that there is something to be said for an intuition, kind of a savviness, where you need to be able to read people, you need to be able to read your audience, you need to be able to say, is this something that would be acceptable or not? And if you're not sure, and it's something where, is it really worth the risk? Why even go there? And you can be very funny, like one of the last callers brought up. You can be very funny and endearing and approachable when you insinuate stuff without actually having to go there. It's almost like I use the comparison where someone can look very provocatively or sexy dressed without having to show much of anything. You can present this kind of alluring look without having to have it all hang out. And then at some point, when it all hangs out, it's no longer sexy. It becomes vulgar. It becomes in your face. There's nothing left to the imagination. And I think that's a very good analogy when it comes to swearing and cursing as well. So I think it's always good to just take the high ground. I don't think that it's a great strategy. I don't think that it's going to always let people know this is important or increase the impact of what you have to say, because many times they're going to be hung up on, oh, they just said this word and now they're a little taken back or they're a little surprised, and they may have missed what you said after that because they're still processing the word that shocked them a little bit. And I think that it's also, how do you want to be remembered? How do you want people to perceive you? And you know what? It's a free country. If that's your shtick and that's part of your personality and that's how you express yourselves and you don't give a darn about it, and you're fine with being perceived as someone who uses a lot of expletives, then so be it. Then that's fine. But if you're not cool with that, or you see that it could be detrimental sometimes, you have to really give it a second thought. There was this one fashion designer that I had been hearing a lot about. Apparently she was very smart and very cutting edge about what she was doing, and someone had told me that she had a show on TV. And I had one very different perception of her based on what people were telling me. And then I tuned into the show, and probably in the first 30 seconds of the show, she dropped the F-bomb about 4 times. It completely changed my impression of her. I was like, oh, I guess maybe she's not a class act. And it just really changed it. And again, look, I'm not holier than thou, and I've had my moments too, and I probably will in the future because we're human, and that happens. But I just know years ago, I was someplace on a job, and this camera guy was with us, and we were all out. We had worked during the day. It was probably something going on in Las Vegas, and people had gone out that night before, and everybody was getting all chummy with each other, and people started dropping a couple of the words. And then I remember I must have said something, and I don't think it was one of the worst ones, but it was something probably in the realm of the discussion. And he brought me aside and he just said, he goes, why do you want to go there? He goes, aren't you better than that? Don't you think it just lessens you? It really just cheapens you and discounts you. And I got to tell you, he was younger than me, and he was just a really good guy, and it really stuck with me what he said. And again, although I'll have moments, his voice is always in the back of my head, and I'm like, you know what? He's kind of right. So we're talking about swearing, cursing, expletives. Is it ever okay? When do you think it's okay? When do you think it should never be happening? When do you think sometimes we're human and it can happen? Our number is 362-0013. Our email address is patricia@patriciastark.com. And if you'd like to know more about our business, what we do with our coaching, with our training, where we help people with communication skills, public speaking, media training, it's patriciastark.com. Please check out our website, and then you can learn more about what we do. But again, we're at 362-0013, and we're talking about some of the colorful language that is out there in the world, and when we should use it or never use it. And we have another caller. Hi, welcome to Inside and Out.
Good morning. I just want to say I really enjoy your show. I've been listening the last couple of weeks, and I think you have such really interesting topics.
Oh, thank you.
This topic is, I have teenage boys, so this topic is really interesting to me.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that in the workplace, there's no place for cursing, especially if you want to be looked upon as a leader in any way, shape, or form. It's just not appropriate.
Yeah.
I do my fair amounts of cursing in the car.
When people cut you off, or when?
Yes. And, when I see somebody doing something, or almost hitting me and that kind of thing. So I will cop to that. I have a story similar to yours in that I did let loose with a curse in front of a gentleman, and he stopped. We were actually walking together. He stopped dead in his tracks because it was something that, he'd never thought would part my lips.
Yeah.
And, he was shocked, and so we had a giggle over it.
Yeah.
And but the other thing is getting back to the music. I think our kids are so desensitized to the music and the terms that go on. I'm not a prude, so really cursing isn't really the issue. It's the context in which it's used.
Yes.
And a lot of the rap music that I personally object to, my kids will know that as soon as certain songs come on, I'm changing the channel, is when they use it to describe a person,
right.
and particularly in the cases of women.
Mm-hmm.
And, Jay-Z himself stopped using certain words when he had a daughter. daughter, it suddenly occurred to him that, that's not the best way to describe a woman now that he was the father of one.
Yes.
So, I think it's a really interesting topic. I think that people should use it sparingly, as you said. And I think that your show is terrific, so I'll continue to listen in.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
And the caller she brings up some really good points, is that how we use our words can either build people up or knock them down and tear them down. And it's one thing where reports say that cursing can relieve stress or pain or things like that, but when they're used to belittle people, to minimize people, to make people feel less than, we don't have a right to do that to anybody. No one has the right to make another human being feel that way. So again, whether it's curse words or words that cut and hurt, I think that it is so true. And we've talked about this on other shows where just think of the 3 words, I love you, and how different they can be based on how you say them, how you use them, how you use your voice. You could say, I love you, or I love you, like you could care less, or I love you, like I'm going to do something negative with that. So that's a very good point, that if they're in comedy, if they're sparingly, if it's amongst people where you're not offending other people and it's something that's an inside bonding type of thing or whatever it may be, that's something you have to decide for your own life and what your parameters and what's acceptable to you and your own personal standards.
The difference between cursing at someone, which is completely inappropriate, or cursing because somebody cut you off in the car and you're by yourself and nobody else is hearing it. It just makes you feel...
We all do get a little different personalities when we're in the car, don't we? It's
Yeah.
like an extension of ourselves or something. So just before we wrap it up, Psychology Today had the 7 best reasons for swearing. Okay? Number 1 was pain relief, which we've already talked about, that it activates the fight or flight response. Number 2 was power and control, saying that swearing gives us a greater sense of power and control over a bad situation. Now, I think it's important that they say over a bad situation, but we don't want to use them to have power and control over someone else, because again, that's minimizing, that's cutting people down, that's manipulating in a very negative way. The number 3 reason was nonviolent retribution. Swearing enables us to get back at bad situations or people without resorting to violence. Okay, I would rather you curse at me than take out a weapon or use a fist. I get that. Okay, so maybe that's... I prefer that. Humor. Swearing among friends can be hilarious. It represents a release from normal social constraints, or like play fighting. It makes light of a potentially threatening personal or situation, maybe. Number 5, peer and social bonding. Swearing can serve to show that we belong to a certain group, that we're able to be ourselves, and be wholly comfortable with the members of the group. Saying if done correctly, it's a signal that we're open, honest, self-deprecating, easygoing, and a barrel of loads of fun. Okay, so basically we're saying, here's my real self, a cursing maniac. I'm not quite sure I agree with that one. Number 6, self-expression. Swearing can be a way of showing that we really mean something or that it's really important to us. That's why swearing can be part of sports. It makes us more lively and interesting, they're saying. It gives a punch to our speech. I don't know. I think we can think of more interesting ways to do that. And my son is 9 and he plays on a lot of teams. And frankly, when the coaches hear anything, they consider that unsportsmanship and unsportsmanlike, and they're not tolerating that. And then finally, number 7, they say psychological and physical health. Health benefits of swearing include increased circulation, elevated endorphins, overall sense of calm, control, and well-being. I guess it's part of venting. But they say the key is to do it sparingly and not to get angry at the same time, which could be very bad for you as well as terribly vulgar. So those are Psychology Today's findings of the 7 reasons for swearing. But that doesn't mean that, again, that they have to meet up to your own personal standards and the way that you want to be perceived in the world. And notice next time when somebody does it, just think for a second and say, how does that make me feel about them? Or when you do it, say, how did that just make me feel about myself? And I'm going to do the same thing. And I think that we're just about out of time. So thank you so much for tuning in to Inside and Out. And Lynn, I'll tell you to have a good day, and I'll do it without having to use a curse.
And have a great Mother's Day.
Yes, happy Mother's Day, everyone. Okay. We'll see you next time. Take care.